Hey there Wargamers, Justin the Arm Painter here from Death Ray Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to weather up your miniatures. Now if you're interested in how we got the particular pieces we're working on today into the state that they are, make sure you check out our previous tutorial videos. We've explained how to do the base coats with the airbrush, as well as laying down the decals and doing some basic scratch marks. For today's tutorial, we're going to be working with a Space Marine Rhino side hatch, as well as a Space Marine Rhino top hatch. Now if you're interested in how we've got the pieces in the current state that they're in today, make sure you check out our YouTube library. We've got videos explaining how to do everything that we've got here currently. Now there are a couple of reasons why I chose these two pieces to be our test bed for doing weathering techniques, and that is because rhino hatches and materials are very prevalent in our wargaming community, but also because I have a blue hatch and a red one with yellow and white, so we've got a variety of different colors that you're going to be able to see our techniques applied over. To get things started today, let's cover some of the materials you'll need to achieve these weathering effects. First and foremost, you're going to need a piece of pluck foam. Something that looks like this will do just fine and give nice textures. We're also going to be using some typhus corrosion, some Agrax earth shade, as well as some Vallejo model color silver. Any silver you have will do. I like this because it's very bright. It's a nice color. Going to be using Ryza Rust from Citadel as well. Going to be using some Evil Sun Scarlet, as well as Fenrisian Gray, followed up by Army Painter's Dry Rust. We're going to start off today by working with the quick and easy step, and for that we're going to be using our typhus corrosion from Citadel, as well as a piece of our pluck foam. And we're going to grab this pluck foam and we're going to pinch it in half here, and we're going to be pinching off some little pieces here to try and get a kind of sort of a tip or a bevel, but by pinching this way you get an interesting organic style look to it, and this is going to be great for applying some chipped effects that look really cool across the surface here. The more interesting textures you get on this, the more realistic your chips are going to look. You don't want to have the same exact style chips all over your rhino hatches here. It's important to make sure you shake up your typhus corrosion before you begin, because it's got some grit or sediment or something like that in there that you need to get mixed up and suspended into the paint. So to get things started, we're going to go ahead and work with our Ultramarines Rhino hatch first. Now if you watched our previous tutorial, you'll know that the scratch marks we applied on here were with a black paint, and today we're using typhus corrosion, which is going to be a brown. So we're going to dip our pluck foam into our typhus corrosion here, and then we're going to dab it onto our paper towel here, similar to what you would do with dry brushing. You don't want to paint this on, you want to dab it on, and you want to get a little bit into the foam, but you want to have just a little bit left on there, not a whole bunch, because you just want little small dabs to come off on your particular piece you're working on. So we're going to go ahead and aim for some of the edges of the model here. Light dabs. I like to rotate the foam around a little bit in my fingers as I go, because it helps give us different textures and different types of chips, and also by adjusting the pressure, how much you apply to the actual foam when you're dabbing will give you different sizes of paint chips as well. If you really want to sell the weathering effect, you want to make sure you cover some of the decal with this as well. It's going to really help sell the idea that the weathering is on top of the decal and help give the illusion that the decal is painted on the surface and part of the model, not actually a decal, which is great. You're going to get these realistic effects. Now with weathering, a lot of times less is more, so don't go overboard, and in this case, I think this looks really great. With a little bit of movie magic, I'm going to speed up the footage here. However, we're going to be utilizing the same techniques we applied to our Rhino side hatch to the top. We're going to be focusing on the edges and making sure to get nice chipped effects anywhere that the hatches and paint would be rubbed or hit or targeted. Paying particular notice to the teeth of the top of the hatch that go down the center where they connect. Those are areas where there's going to be lots of movement, lots of chipping, lots of friction. With our dabbing now complete, you could call this good. This could be a good stopping point for basic tabletop. However, we're going to let this dry, and we're going to come in with the next step and continue pushing the detail level on our weathering pieces. With our typhus corrosion now dry, it's time to come in with some paint and push the depth on these chips. If you recall from our previous tutorial, where we used a lighter color on the underside of the chips or the scratches, where the light would catch, we're going to be utilizing that same technique here. So we're going to come in on these chips, at least the big ones, and we're going to hit the underside with our Fenrisian Gray to give some depth to the chips. Now you can go in and get some of the small ones as well if you feel confident you can get the small highlight on the underside of it, but don't feel the need to hit all of them. After all, some of the chips may be deeper than others or bigger than others, and some variance in what you've got on your miniatures is going to only add to the overall weathered effect. Remember, when you're highlighting your chips, you're not going all the way around. You're trying to focus on the underside where the light would be catching. The light's coming from the top and coming down the surface. You don't have a light shooting up from the ground. If you did, then it would be hitting different areas. But in this case, we're going to assume that the light's coming downward. Now, we are only working on a single rhino hatch here currently. If you were doing this, you may be applying these effects to the surface of a whole miniature here, a whole tank or a whole dreadnought or something like that. So be patient. Go slow, take your time, have a lot of fun really crafting the weathering on your miniature. It may seem mundane at first, but when you think about it, you're really adding age to your miniature. You're adding story. You're adding character. Really think about that way working through this and imagine the battles and the stories that your Space Marines or your particular miniatures are forging. With the highlights done on the chips for our Space Marine Rhino hatch, it's time to come in on the top hatch now. For this one, because it's red, we're going to be using a different color, in this case Evil Sun Scarlet, but we're going to be using the same techniques. Now, for this one, it is a little bit different though, because the Space Marine Rhino side hatch is vertical, so you kind of can know where the light source is coming from. For this one, you're going to have to kind of choose where you think your light source is coming from and do your highlights based on that. This one's going to have to come up to you, and you're going to have to make the decision. In this particular case, I'm going to assume the portion of the hatch that is aiming towards the ceiling in this case for me is going to be the direction where the light is coming from. So essentially, in essence, I'm going to be applying these edge highlights in the same way that I did on the Rhino hatch. Now this is also a little bit different as well because we've got a variety of different colors here. So not only do we have to do the chips on the red, we also have to do the chips on the black and the yellow teeth there in the middle. So when we get to those, we're going to be switching over to a yellow paint and a gray paint respectively. And with our highlights applied, we've got two very similar effects, but with two different paint schemes. Now, you could call this good if you wanted to stop here, but that's not what we do, folks. We make things death ray difficult. One of the key benefits of this process, though, is we used typhus corrosion, and that's got a little bit of grit in it. So for our next step, we're going to be working with dry brushing, and specifically, we're going to be using Army Painter Dry Rust. We'll be using this alongside Citadel's Riser Rust today, but I find both of these have different applications and different effects, and I'll show you that as we move along. For this style of dry brushing, I will be using my Army Painter dry brush today. I really like this because it's got a nice beveled edge, and it lends itself really well to targeted dry brushing, and I can get some really nice effects with this. Now this is not required, you can use any kind of dry brush you like, but I really like this one for the effects that you can get. I've went ahead and squirted out some of our dry rust here from Army Painter. We're going to load up our paintbrush here, and just like with normal dry brushing, we're going to get as much excess out as we can. And we'll use the back of our glove or our hand to make sure that we've got the consistency that we like. And here, I'm happy with that. And now we're going to come in here and we're going to do some dry brushing where the riser rust was. We're going to go in a downward motion, and by holding the brush this way and going in a downward motion, pushing down on that tip, we're going to exploit the kind of more wet dry brush paint from Army Painter. We're going to get these really nice, faint, subtle rust streaks, and this is why I really like this paint for this effect, and I really love using their dry brushes for targeted dry brushing. This is one of the easiest ways to get rust streaks I've found, and I hope that you use this technique and it works out well for you as well. Make sure you're really targeting the areas where we applied that typhus corrosion, because the typhus corrosion has a grit to it, which I mentioned before, which means it picks up the dry brush really well. We're also going to focus on the teeth here and make sure all of our brush strokes are kind of going the same direction. We want all these rust streaks from this to go the same way. We don't want any crazy areas where the rust is going one way, but gravity dictates it would go the other. So play with this, have fun. Remember that less can be more. So go slow, be subtle with it, and build up the paint. In this case, I think this looks great. Alright, now we're going to come in and apply these same techniques to the top hatch here, doing the same motions, focusing on the same areas where that typhus corrosion was. Now it's important to note that when you start applying this over the yellow and the white areas, it's going to look a lot different than it did over that blue. So, use that philosophy of less is more and go subtle and build up until you get a consistency you like. Don't just go all out willy-nilly for the Emperor here, folks, and ruin any of the paint. Build up your weathering and go slow until you're happy. With our rust streaks now applied with our dry rust compound from Army Painter, it's time to move on. You could stop right here, but we're going to come back in with some Rise of Rust, which is a more thick traditional dry brush from Citadel. We're going to be using one of our mangled up Army Painter dry brushes, but that's just fine. It is perfect for this. With our dry brush loaded up with our Rise of Rust dry brush paint, we're going to be coming here and focusing in on all the areas where we dabbed typhus corrosion initially. Now you'll notice that this applies a different effect than the dry rust from Army Painter. That one's a bit more of a wet dry paint, sort of, and this one is a bit more dry, it's more pigmenty, and I find that the typhus corrosion paint with that grit to it picks up this dry brush better than it does the Army Painter dry rust. However, the Army Painter stuff does better streaks, so I like these both for different effects, but you add them together and you get this cool looking rust. Now we're going to come in here and we're going to apply the same principles, same techniques to our Rhino top hatch, and really make all those areas with typhus corrosion pop. As I mentioned before, sometimes less is more, so go slow with this, be subtle, and build up the rust effects until you get something you like. In particular, when you're going with this piece right here, because we do have yellow and white in the middle. Now, I find that rust streaks show up really, really well on those colors, but you can easily overdo it and end up having just an orange blob, and you lose the yellow and the white that you have applied. So go slow, be patient, and have fun really building up the character of your miniatures. Right here at the end, I'm going to make sure I get a nice amount of this Rise of Rust across the teeth where we had a decent amount of that typhus corrosion, and those are complete. These look great. Now again, you could stop right here if you want, but as I said, we make things death ray difficult, so we're going to be coming in with some Agrax Earthshade for an additional step to push our weathering to the next level. So we're going to grab one of our crappy disposable brushes here, have the right tool for the job, get some of our Agrax Earthshade, and apply it on the undersides of where our chipped effects are, following the rust streaks where our typhus corrosion was applied. Now, there's no real rhyme or reason to this, you just kind of have to start applying it and applying the streaks and see what works for you. Now, I find doing small streaks and going subtle and dragging them down, and then coming back when they're dry and applying more and kind of layering it up to increase and build that intensity is one way to get some really interesting rust looking streaks, oil streaks, and it's very fun. So have fun with this, play with it, again, really forge the narrative, forge the story for your characters. Perhaps your Space Marines were on some world where it's very corrosive. They were there for a long time. They've been beaten and battered. Let that be what you focus on and think of when you're working on your miniatures. So you can see simply by just adding that wash for the rust streaks, this is starting to look really beat up, really weathered. It's looking pretty ridiculous, but I love it. With our Rhino hatch drying, it's now for us to transition over to the top hatch, and we're going to be using the same wash and applying the same techniques to get interesting rust streaks over here as well. Now this one's going to have some interesting areas to apply rust streaks because we've actually got the teeth in the center of the top hatch where the colors change, which we've talked about multiple times during this video. And that's the reason why I had a blue hatch and a red one with the yellow, the black, and the white, because you can really see how these different weathering effects apply to other models with different colors. So the sky really is the limit. Make sure you have fun with this, and don't be discouraged if you don't have blue or red models or yellow, whatever the color may be. Have fun with this, try new things. Again, always be subtle, build up the weathering until you get an effect that you like. You can always add more paint. You can't go back and take it off very easily. With our rust streaks now dry, these will be perfectly acceptable for tabletop standard or possibly above. But wait! There's more. It wouldn't be a tutorial with just in the arm painter if I didn't make things death ray difficult. And you guessed it, there is one final step that's really going to pull these together and make these look awesome. Now, if you paid attention at the beginning of the tutorial, we went over some paints, and on our paint list, there was the Vallejo model color silver, and here we are with that color. We're going to be applying this, but we're going to be focusing on all the areas where the typhus corrosion was. Similar to how we did our scratch marks, where we applied the silver down the center of the black areas very subtly. We're going to be coming in and doing the same thing, but focusing on the areas where the typhus corrosion was. We want to go in and kind of follow the path that the typhus corrosion was applied in and make these interesting organic looking marks. Now, we don't want to cover all of the typhus corrosion. You still want to kind of have a border around where the silver is applied, but think of this as more recent chips. So we've got rust effects, chip effects, highlighting, and rust streaks. These silver areas we're putting inside that typhus corrosion, this is where it's a recent ding or a clip or an area that hasn't quite rusted yet. So have fun with this, and you don't have to hit every area where the typhus is. Sometimes less is more. Build it up, have fun, create that story, make that awesome battle damage for your miniatures that reflects whatever war they've been waging. Have fun with this. And there we go, with a little bit of warp time cast in our video editing software. Our silver has now been applied, our chips are now complete, and you can see the amazing depth in these pieces. With the last of the weathering now dry, I think we're going to call these two pieces complete. It's been an awesome journey so far, being able to showcase a variety of techniques with you guys in our previous tutorials, and kind of coming to a climax here at the end. We're quite confident if you use these techniques on your miniatures, you'll be able to get some awesome effects very quickly. We're also confident if you use the tools we're kind of giving you, you'll be able to develop them into your own and create your own style and your own techniques. And that means we'd really like to see what you're working on. Show us what you've done. If you've used any of our techniques or adapted those or maybe done something on your own, make sure you share those with us. Check us out on Facebook, check out our Facebook group, The Tap Garrison, or tag us on Instagram. That's 3 ways for you to connect with us and 3 ways where we can see your miniatures, which we really do like to see. There's way more of you guys than there are of us, and we're able to see more of your miniatures than we'll ever be able to paint in our own lifetime. It's very motivating and exciting to see what you guys are getting into. As always, if you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check out deathraydesigns.com. Anything you do over there helps keep the lights on, it helps keep me employed so I can continue producing content for you guys. If you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, ding that little bell so you get notifications when our videos go live. And with that being said, we're going to sign off today, folks. I'd like to thank you again for watching, and as always, happy wargaming.